So welcome, everybody. My name is Carol Stern, and I'm a librarian here at the GLEN COVE Public Library. And thanks for coming out on this beautiful day. Before we begin, I just want to tell you the next author is August 19th at 2 o'clock. It's a Tuesday. Lego Goodman will be, who wrote Isola. I don't know if you've read that, but it's another very good book. So we're thrilled to have Ellen Baker, the author of the moving novel, The Hidden Life of Cecily Larson. The book has captivated readers with its rich storytelling, emotional depth, and an unforgettable protagonist. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Ellen is an award-winning novelist who works to combine historical detail with personal storytelling. She is the author of Keeping the House, I Gave My Heart to Know This, and most recently, The Hidden Life of Cecily Larson. Her novels explore themes of identity, resilience, and the power of memory. She originally is from Wisconsin. She's lived in many parts of the country, from Minnesota to New Mexico, and now lives in Maine. She has a background in bookselling, historic preservation, and public libraries, and she understands the importance of stories, both we read and those we carry with us. So on Ellen's website, I read your whole blog, and I thought this was an interesting little tidbit of information, so I'm going to read it to everybody. Ellen recounts a formative moment in her life. As a teenager, she was introduced to the writer Frederick Manfred, who welcomed her into his home, showed her his writing space, and took time to read her work. He encouraged her to keep writing, and he predicted that she'd be published by the time she was 30, and he was right.
Yes.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So could you tell us what inspired you to write The Hidden Life of Cecily Larson?
Yeah, of course. Well, first, thank you so much again for having me, and thank you to everyone for being here on this gorgeous summer day. So I started writing Cecily Larson from the point of the question, really, of what would it be possible to keep a secret while living in a small town? So I've always lived in small towns, and as Carol mentioned, I've lived all around the country in different small towns, most recently in Maine. And I thought, I've noticed over the years just how difficult it is to keep secrets in small towns. Everyone seems to know things about you that before you know them yourself. But I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if somebody could keep a secret and then after many, many years or even decades, it came out? So that was where I began, was with this idea of a woman who has lived in a small town all her life and who has created this reputation of being a certain way. And she's the doctor's wife. She's the greatest fundraiser the town has ever known. She single-handedly creates this performing arts center in the hospital for this tiny town. But what nobody knows is that she had this whole other life before coming to this small town. So then as I thought about the story, I thought, well, what's going to make it meaningful? What are the secrets going to be? And they have to be pretty significant to still matter after 70 years. So that was where I started to come up with some of the backstory and what Cecily had done in her past. And so that was really where I began, and I'm happy to, talk about all the backstory stuff too. But that was really the inspiration for the book, was that question about keeping a secret in a small town.
Did you know a person like Cecilia?
No, I
No.
didn't. No.
So could you tell us how long it took you to go from the idea that you had to publication? And
Yeah, so for that, I always say like somewhere between 15 years and 2 years, because I actually had the idea originally about 15 years ago, and then I had set it aside and worked on other things. And then when it was like early 2021, I started thinking about what I wanted to write next and came upon this idea in my file. And it was an idea that had been rejected by my editor at Random House years ago, and I was calling it The Hidden Life of Emily Larson. And so I looked at it, and with the perspective of those 10 or 15 years that had gone by, I saw the problem was I hadn't made her secrets interesting enough. So I thought it was still an interesting question about this, woman moving to a small town in Minnesota and like what would happen if she kept all these secrets. But I hadn't made the secrets interesting enough. So that was where I went from there. It was like to increase the significance of those secrets.
So how did you research the novel? There are subtle allusions to historical events in Hollywood's golden age, Alaska's early statehood, etc. So could you tell us how you got to all the research that you did?
Sure, yeah. So I do research in a kind of a layered way. So first I begin by kind of knowing an overarching idea of the story and what it's going to involve. And from there I get kind of a general sense of what's going on in the wider world during these years. I also have a background in American history, so I kind of know some of that stuff of early 20th century America. But getting that background idea to make sure I'm not, missing anything major as far as events, economic stuff, political stuff, all that, like it's kind of there in the background. And then from there, I begin figuring out, step by step what particular details I'll need to know for my chapters, my scenes, my characters. I do a lot of research for each character before I begin. So I begin by going into their background and figuring out where they were from. And so I do that kind of research before I really even start. And then as I get into writing scene by scene, I'll get into really tiny details. Like I was really trying to figure out for a long time, like what kind of shoes did a bareback rider wear in the 1920s? And I came up with, by looking at pictures and stuff, it seems like they wore these ballet slipper type shoe. But I really couldn't find a written description of them. So I do my best to get all the way down to details like that and get everything correct. The circus was a big project for me to research because I really didn't know much about the circus. And I really didn't set out to write a circus novel, but what I really wanted was, again, for Cecily to have these really interesting secrets in her background. And I thought being a circus bareback rider, a performer, would be a pretty interesting thing to have in your past to keep from your family. So I decided to give her that for that reason, and also because I really wanted this love story between Cecily and Lucky to take place in a way that felt realistic um, and beautiful and also doomed. And having them in this way, in this world of the circus, gave them this world in which I felt like it was pretty believable that they could fall in love, and that Cecily is so naive and she doesn't really understand the wider world, and she doesn't really understand why they're an odd couple. And she likes to think they're just like the tiger tamer and the clown, she says, like why are we any different? So for that reason, I decided to put it in the circus, not because I wanted to write about the circus or because I wanted to learn about the circus, but for those reasons. So I started out on kind of a broad base of like what circuses were like at that time in history, and then narrowed it down to logistics. I needed to figure out things like, how far they traveled every night, what their daily schedule was. Um, and with that, then I wrote out a whole schedule. I wrote out notes of who was who in the circus because it's a rather big cast of characters, and I had to really work to try to not veer off into these other characters' stories, which were going to be pretty interesting, I thought. But I tried to keep it narrow, but also like understanding enough about the characters that they seem real on the page. So, so all the things from logistics to the details of train travel in that time period to how they put the horses into the car so that they can't fall over. They put them side by side by side by side. I thought that was really interesting. So just getting into all the nitty gritty of that was interesting. And I did it really all at my desk using Google Earth, and this website called circushistory.org, which has And believe it or not, every detail of every little circus in the 1920s and 30s that was traveling through America at that time. So learning about how in the 20s and earlier, all the circuses traveled by train. And then into the 30s, when the economy failed, a lot of circuses failed, and some of them had to go to traveling by truck in order to like make it or try to make it. And I didn't want my circus to travel by truck because, for obvious reasons, if you've read the book, they needed to be on the train for the story to work. So I had to make the ringmaster Tebow just absolutely opposed to the sort of indignity of travel by truck, and he was not going to give up the train. So like working with the historical details and then putting them into a story form so that it's character driven. It's driven by the ringmaster being a certain way. It's driven by Isabel being a certain way and Cecily being a certain way and Lucky being a certain way. But in order to make it all seem real, I had to have all that background in place first. And I just did it, as I said, just at my desk. And I didn't really finish answering your question about how long it took me. I actually started writing this in January 2021 and finished in August 2021.
Oh, it's
And
fast.
it was pretty fast for me, especially. I used to always take 3 to 4 years to write a book. But this one, it just seemed to really um, already know what it wanted to be. I don't take credit for that. I feel like it just sort of was there. And Cecily was such a live character from the start. I didn't struggle to create her. She was already there. And same with Lucky and a lot of the other characters. They all seem pretty present. So, and I'm a quick researcher, and I was able to narrow down what I needed to know and what I didn't need to know. So I did it that way. Then some rewriting, and then um, uh, going, sorry, um,
Someone, let me mute.
I'm just, please mute yourself.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
oh no, that's okay. But anyway, I wrote the first draft in about 8 months, did some rewrites, did a little bit of rewriting the following year, and then the book sold in February 2023 and was published in February 2024 originally.
That's fast.
It was pretty fast.
Do you outline? Do you take notes? Do you type them? Do you handwrite? Like, what's your process like that?
Um, as far as taking research notes, you
Yes.
mean? Yes. So I write down a big timeline, and then I like to make notes with a pen on paper because I don't keep track of things if they're on the computer that well. I like to kind of spread them out. So I take notes on paper and then write my drafts on the computer.
Have you been to a circus recently? Have you gone?
I have not. I think I went to one when I was real little, but I don't even really remember it.
I went when I was a little kid also, but the circuses have changed now. They're so
Yeah.
different than they were back then. And I
Yeah.
bet from the 20s it was different than, a lot different than it
Yeah.
is now.
Yeah.
Just talk about the orphan homes too. How did you research? You were so in depth about the orphan homes. How did you research that? That was so interesting.
Yeah, so in Cecily's early life, getting put in the orphanage when she's 4, I had heard a lot of stories about and read a lot of stories about kids getting left by their parents at that time in history because the parents couldn't afford to keep them. So I really just kind of took what I had absorbed over time and created this place in Chicago. And again, it just kind of seemed to be um, to be the way it was. And then as Cecily gets older and she winds up in this basically like a reformatory or reform prison for girls in North Carolina, that I actually found a book that is a very well-researched, wonderful book called Bad Girls at Samarkand. And there was a institution for girls in North Carolina that is exactly like I wrote about in the novel. I just called it something different, and it was called Samarkand. And it was mostly for girls who had, strayed off the accepted paths. And I was just, you know, really it's upsetting to read about. And I made Cecily get out of there. I allowed her. I wrote the story so that she would get out of there because it really wasn't clear how you would get out of there once you were put in. It's almost like in the past when women were called insane and put away. Kind of the same thing. Once you've been labeled as that, it's really hard to get back into being a so-called respectable woman. So I just made up this idea that there would be this racket going on. But that was as far as getting Cecily out to a nicer home where she could have her child, and then they took the child away and told her it died. Um, all of that was somewhat just it was so that the story could turn out the way I wanted it to be, but it was also based on the Tennessee Children's Home and Aid Society, which I'm sure you all probably have read before we're yours by Lisa Wingate, who that wrote about that, where they're selling the babies in the kind of the time of eugenics and babies of a certain type being desirable and so forth and could fetch a high price. So all of that is, just a really terrible part of our history. And but I thought it made for a good novel, and that I would try to put it all together and make it so Cecily survived, and that she got out and she was able to have this life in her small town in Minnesota, even despite all that terrible stuff that happened.
So you talk about genealogy in the book, like ancestry.com. Do you have a personal interest in ancestry, or have you ever done it? Have you uncovered secrets?
Yeah, yeah, I've always been interested in genealogy. From I think I was born old. I was like 12 years old, going to cemeteries and like making notes and stuff. But so I've always had an interest in that and in family connections. I had not done ancestry prior to writing this book, but in the process of writing this book, I decided to do it so that I'd know what it was like. And so I actually, that whole thing about how you put it in how you spit into the test tube, like I did it just so that I'd know how to describe it, and then waited, the 6 weeks, not expecting anything untoward to come up, but that little thought of like Liz thinks, like, what if something comes up? And then she's like, oh, probably everyone thinks that. And I actually, I did wonder about that. But mine came back just, completely everything as I had always been told. So no surprises for me. But I have been fascinated ever since those testing, for the last 10, 15 years when people have started testing more. And I'm sure in this room, there are people who've had the experience of having a surprise. And I've heard many people tell me their stories since writing this book. And I just thought, really, what could be a more dramatic experience as a human than finding out you're not who you think you are? So that was why I wanted to write about it. And I've always been interested in those stories because I'm interested in family and identity and how we decide who we are and how we make home and how we decide where we belong.
I find it fascinating also. And even if it doesn't uncover like, your father's not your father, it tells you other things that I thought was so interesting. The things but that it's genetic that they tell you.
Yes, yeah, it is
From spitting
fascinating.
into a vial, they tell me I have wavy hair. Like that's so interesting that.
It is, yeah, fascinating.
So the book asks the question, what truly defines family? The blood you share or the love you choose to offer? You want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, sure. Well, I always think my job as a novelist is to pose questions rather than answer them. But so I might talk more about the question than the answer, because I just think one of the thing, okay, I'll just say the thing I love most about being a novelist is getting to think about these things and talk about these things and really think about what life really means. And what does I don't know why somebody's at my door right in the middle of this. I'm sorry. Anyway, so to be able to think about questions such as what decides where you belong, um, is really a privilege of this job. And so I didn't intend to answer it. I don't have an answer for it, but I think each of the characters kind of comes up with their own answer. So, the devastation that Liz feels of not, um, you know, of what she discovers. She has a very difficult reaction. Some of the others find out things that make them happy and makes it all make sense to them. Cecily, has a moment where everything is kind of healed and comes together for her. So I think with that, it's just an exploration of how each of our journeys is so individualized and unique, and that we also have the power to kind of create our own narrative around what happens to us. Cecily, for example, always has this optimism and is always going to create magic wherever she goes, basically, just by being who she is. Um, so I think those are the kinds of things that I wanted to sort of explore is, not just what makes family, but how do we create the stories of our lives? How do we decide what's true? There's something about DNA test results, but there's a lot of truth in experience and in the things we say to ourselves as well. So.
So can you talk about Cecily a little? Like, I think her life feels dangerous and uncertain, and then she meets the circus community, and there are a lot of castaways, and she fits in with all of them. You want to how they all support and challenge each other? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Cecily in the orphanage, she's always wondering if it's from the ages of 4 to 7. She's wondering if she'll ever get adopted, if she'll ever find a home, if she'll ever be taken out and put somewhere. She has no power. Um, but she forms these really close friendships with these two little kids, Flip and Dolores. And I think when they're 6, they make a blood oath that they're always going to be together because they say after you're 6, you're never going to get adopted. So she has that young life experience of really truly being unstable, unsettled, she doesn't belong anywhere except for where she makes herself belong with Flip and Dolores. And then, of course, she's yanked out of there and taken to the circus. And she's resistant to that at first. It's hard for her, but she does kind of create a family, and they all kind of adopt her from day one. And she begins to take comfort in that, even though it's scary at first. But she starts to take some comfort in sort of belonging. She begins to feel that Isabel, the older girl who's her mentor, is really truly like an older sister to her. And she says she'll do anything for her. She's never had a sister before, and all that kind of thing. So again, she sort of creates her own story and her own world within the world of the circus, and she makes the best of it. And she loves going to school, but they decide she's not allowed to go to school. And there's this little moment of heartbreak where her friend, who is the daughter of the owner of the circus, gets to keep going to school and has a real mom and all that stuff. And Cecily gets sent to live with the performers in the barn or wherever, the building where they're staying, the bunkhouse. And there's a moment of heartbreak there because she's lost another feeling of home. So she has that over and over and over again, where she gets home taken away from her. But because she is the resilient and optimistic and just the survivor that she is, she always finds a way to sort of frame it in a way like, well, this will be okay because now I get to see Isabel perform more, and now I get to do. So she's always like looking on the bright side, and even though you feel her little heart breaking, she's also getting stronger and stronger with those little breaks. And that, I think, is ultimately what helps her survive what she goes through.
Yeah, I think it's really hard when you have such an unusual childhood. Like, how do you become such a functional adult? It's unbelievable, really.
I know I did wonder about that too. And I think that was another of the questions I started with was like, is it ever possible to escape our pasts? Is it possible to truly reinvent ourselves? And I think if anybody could do it, Cecily could. And the only little cracks she had in her facade, because she's always been a performer all her life. And so, in a way, you could look at her 70 years in Itasca, Minnesota as another performance, but she was very successful at it. And her little cracks in her facade, where she would go down and see the trains in the train yard, and I think we don't get that from her point of view, but I think she was down there wondering what it would be like to jump on one of them and just get out of there. And number two, she makes these cakes, the 15-layer cakes that were Lucky's grandmother's recipe. And that's her little nod to her past. And otherwise, she does not let it in. She just shut the door on it. And I think you have to be very strong to do that.
So, you said before that it's a book about family secrets, but it's more than family secrets. It's a story, I think, between the ties between mothers and daughters. Why did you focus so much on that? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So again, I think it was for the purpose of just creating the story I wanted to tell. And when I sit down to start thinking about what a novel is going to look like, I I'll just make a family tree. That's where I always start. And like, what year were they born? And then is this going to be a daughter or a son? And so I gave Cecily two daughters. Um, and so it turned into a story about mothers and daughters. I don't know that I set out to do that as much as it just happened. And it felt right for the story. I think it, really did become a story about the choices that women have to make. And because there were several generations of women, Cecily, her daughter Liz, and then her granddaughter Molly, and then in the other branch, the others. Um, I really like telling women's stories. I really love delving into the difficult decisions women have to make in their lives. And so by having those multiple generations of women, I was able to do that. And then it does become a lot about the relationships between the mothers and daughters.
I thought it was so heartbreaking when Cicely chooses to leave her daughter. You know,
Mm.
th-
Hmm.
th- she was abandoned and then she's abandoned. There's a whole story behind that, really.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of difficult things that happen for sure.
That's
Mhm.
right. So, could you talk about Lucky and Cecilia? They have a very touching bond. Was Lucky inspired by somebody you knew, or how did you approach that relationship? And the choice that he took to protect her, and what happened
Yeah,
there?
yeah. Um, yeah, so Lucky, I sort of knew what kind of character he would need to be in order for the story to work the way I wanted it to. And he needed to be very thoughtful, very smart, very self-aware, very aware of his surroundings. And I wanted to make him a thinker. So he's all of those things. And then there's a scene where Cecily, it begins the first time Cecily saw him, she was nearly 15 years old, and she's seen him running out of the woods to jump on the circus train to try to travel to the next town with them. And of course, this was a time in history when that would have been going on a lot with guys jumping on trains to travel. And that was the first time I saw Lucky. It was also the first time Cecily saw Lucky. And I just felt similar with how I felt about Cecily, that he was just very alive from the first time I saw him. And I did actually write a few scenes from his point of view. And so I have a scene which I hated to cut out of the book about him like underneath the cage of the tigers where he sleeps at night out on the flat car of the train. And I loved that scene. And he's thinking about how he would get to Cecily because he wants to warn her about the treachery that's going on with Isabel and Thibaut. But and I went through all that in his mind and my mind, and it just I just my heart aches for Lucky. He was such a good guy, and he really did know the danger, and he really loved her, so he knew he knew he had to leave. Um, so yeah, it was heartbreaking for me.
And to read it, it was heartbreaking. So at the center of the family story is a story about forbidden love. This was on I read this on your web page, I think. Writers are usually told, write what you know. Did you do that here? Like, did you do that?
Well, not especially. I mean, um yeah, no, I guess so when I was 15, I did have a boyfriend who was African American, and he was 19, and it was 1990, so it was a different time, but there was still a lot of prejudice and a lot of reasons why people did not want us to be together. And I was a lot like Cecily. I was very naive, and I thought, well, we love each other, and why shouldn't we be together? Love is the most important thing. So there was a little bit of that, but I certainly didn't have, the life and death threat that Cecily and Lucky have.
Are you can tell us what happened to your boyfriend?
And well, we did not end up together because our it's a long story, but I thought about it later, and I think there were a lot of things that came to play, outside forces that had we not been of different races, probably we might have ended up together. So yeah,
You were also young.
I was young. Yes, that's right.
So the novel is told from the points of view of a lot of characters. Was there one character that was more challenging to write than others? And who was the most challenging and who was the easiest?
So that's a weird one because the hardest one for me to write was Molly, and she is the most close to me. And I thought she'd be easy to write because she's born the same year as me. She's got one older brother just like me. She's she and if I hadn't become a writer, I probably would have become a therapist. So she has a lot in common with me, and I just had the hardest time like getting to know her. The others all seemed to come, as I said, they just seemed to come to life. I think they were just very present in my imagination. They felt very real. So
Well, that's interesting. So the cover, I have the book here. Was that the
yeah.
original cover? Was it the original title? Like,
So it is the original title. And I'll show you, I actually have all the covers here because it was not the original cover. So originally they had this cover
oh
that was
wow,
on the advanced copies, and I love this cover very much.
me
But they
too.
decided, yeah, isn't it pretty? I love the stars, and I love it's kind of fanciful, and like the book, like it speaks to the novel being about dreams and believing in possible things somehow. Like I think it's very magical. But they felt that that wasn't going to be the right cover in the end, due to some feedback from the sales. First you work on all this stuff in editorial, and I and the editors and everybody loved that, and then it got sent toward the sales department, and they didn't like it so well. So we went on to a different idea, and some of it is just having to do with merchandising and where it's going to be placed. So this was the new cover, and we worked a long time on this one, trying to get this one right. And I love this one too. And then for the paperback, they came up with this one, which I
Oh,
absolutely love even more than either of the other two. And at first, when I saw this one, I was a little bit disconcerted because I'm all into historical accuracy, and she's not a ribbon artist, and she wouldn't have been wearing a leotard like that. but I finally decided that it was visually really, really appealing. And they did these painted edges on it, which is, or they call them sprayed edges. So that's the whole process of the covers. So three
It's so
different ones.
interesting that they changed the cover from the hardcover to the soft cover. That's interesting that they do that.
Yeah, I think they do that a lot, you know, just if they feel like they can move more copies with a different cover, they'll certainly try, you know.
And now when
Yeah.
you read on an ebook, you don't even see the cover anymore. So you don't even know what,
Oh, really?
like
They
if you
don't
read,
show, I don't read ebooks. I'm still old.
I like books too, but if if you go, you don't see the books, you're just reading the
Huh,
story.
okay, interesting.
So I was wondering if you got any feedback from readers judging Cicely harshly at first, but then they saw her choices through the lenses of trauma and survival. Did people give you any feedback about her?
I haven't had anyone say that to my face. I have only had people say nice things about Cecily. Most people seem to really love her and really understand what she's going through. So,
I agree. Yes. I
yeah,
was just curious, like if someone took a different perspective. Before you were telling us you're working on a new book, you want to tell us about the new book you're working on?
sure, yeah. So over the winter, I wrote a book, which is a family saga set in Maine. It's uh, three generations of women and a summer cottage, and what happens when their perfectly planned summer goes awry. So it's set in 2010 and goes back to the 1970s and 80s. So it's a bit more modern, although I was surprised how 2010 is historical at this point. Um, but I'm really excited about this one. We're working on the title, just like as you alluded to, sometimes titles do change. So I had originally titled it The Cove because it takes place in a neighborhood called The Cove, and they want it called something slightly different. So hopefully pretty soon I'll have a title to be able to share as well, but I'm really excited about it. And it'll be
And
out in May or June of next year.
next year,
Yeah.
you'll
Mhm.
have to come back and talk about that book then.
I will. I'd love to. Yes.
I'm sort of done with my questions. Can we let it go to the audience if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask? You can unmute yourself or you can, are there questions in the chat? No, if you can, either one is good.
Sure. This is Sarah. Just a question. I read your whole book, by the way, from last night to today. I
Oh my
loved it.
goodness.
It was really wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm recovering from surgery, so I have the time, and it was just absolutely delightful. I
Wow.
love the themes of identity and belonging and family and all of that. Um, are you familiar with, there's so much now about these DNA secrets that people are finding out. There's great podcasts. One is called DNA Secrets. There's Family Secrets. I wonder if you've been approached by any of those to be, even though this is fiction, it's just so on point when it comes to so many of these lived experiences.
Thank you. I have not been approached by those. I would love to go talk with them if they had any interest, but so far not.
Okay. I think they might. It's just wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'll have to think see if I can make that happen. That's a great
Yeah.
idea. Thank you.
Yes, I think people would love it. I think there's a lot of people now that are discovering, through accidentally, so many of them too, these
Yeah.
secrets, and that there's a work of fiction that portrays these experiences so beautifully and with so much sensitivity, I think could really be of great interest to them. So I hope you reach
Mm,
out to them and they reach out to you.
thank you. Thank you
Sure.
so much.
Mhm.
Did you read Danny Shapiro's novel?
Yes, actually, that was one of the main ways I got insight into what that's really like is Dani Shapiro's book Inheritance about her experience with the DNA surprise. And I do mention that in the acknowledgments of the book. I think she's such a beautiful, beautiful writer, and I really appreciated that book. Yeah.
That was an interesting story.
Mhm.
Lauren asked, what is your favorite type of novel and what books would you suggest for reading this summer?
So I love to read all sorts of stuff. Mainly I read in the upmarket area that I write in. I am right now in the middle of reading Beatrice Williams. I don't know what year this was published. It's not brand new, but I really, really appreciate her as a writer. She's got a lot of great sentences. She creates a lot of intrigue, and the world that she writes about is fun. So I'm reading that. I just read a book because I did an event with this author, Libby Buck. It's a new debut novel called Port Anna, which takes place in Maine. And so that's a good summer reading choice. And what else for summer reading? Well, Wally Lamb has a new book, which I am intending to grab at any moment. I love Wally Lamb. And I'm really looking forward to John Irving's new book, which is actually coming in September, Queen Esther, it's called. And what else do I have in my stack? Actually, yeah, reading a little of everything. I was reading a Patricia Cornwell. I like her a lot. So sometimes for summer, just a little of everything. I always like Ellen Hildebrand, and of course she doesn't have a new book out this year, but I sometimes will go back and read her. So
I agree with all those authors. So Hillary wrote, I was really impressed by how quickly you wrote this novel. Was that just the rough draft, January to August? How long do you generally spend on revisions before submitting to your agent or publisher?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a great one. So as I mentioned, this was a lot faster of a draft than I usually had written in the past. And it was my first draft, but it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't call it a rough draft because when I write, I usually go and edit everything. Everything I've written the day before, I'll edit pretty carefully. So I edit as I go. So I'm not, even though I'm maybe writing, maybe I write 500 to 1,000 words a day, but I'm editing for about 3 hours, and then I'll spend an hour or 2 or 3 writing the next section. So I spend just as much time reworking as I do creating something new every single day. So that was my process. And it was the first draft. And then I sent it off to 2 readers, 2 people who I really trust. And then I worked on it again, a pretty big rewrite for 2 to 3 months. And I mean, this is, working a good number of hours every day on it. And then again in the following summer, I did another kind of reworking of the beginning, especially, and then one of the storylines, Molly, as I mentioned, I totally changed her storyline. So overall, like I probably would say I worked on it for a year before it's in the shape that you see it here. And it did come out remarkably. I don't even take all the credit for it. It felt just like it rolled out in a much easier way than stuff usually does. So I'm grateful for that. But not to say I didn't work hard, I did. But yeah, so about a year.
Did you write as a kid a lot? Have you been writing?
Yes, I did. I wrote from the time I was 6 and could pick up a pen and form words. I really loved writing stories from all that time. I started writing my first novel when I was 13. I didn't really have the sense to know it wasn't that easy to do. I just know I loved writing novels, and I just started writing one in a notebook. And that was the piece that I sent off to that writer you mentioned at the start, Fred Manfred, who told me if I kept working, I'd be published until when I was 30, which when I was 17 felt like a lifetime away, or like maybe I'd never get to be 30, or you mean I have to work for 13 more years before this goes anywhere. And I have been writing full-time for, let's see, 18 years. And I write every day. And
You
so
write every day.
yeah, pretty much. So
So Teresa wrote, the story of Cecily's mother is so sad. Can you talk about the decision to leave her character unfound? And also the idea that Cecilia never is able to get in contact with Grace to thank her. Did you design these two characters as a mirror of some sort, Grace and Cecilia's mother?
Great question. So I decided to leave a few things unresolved just because I feel like that's kind of the way life is. At least it was before Google and Facebook, that there are just certain people that you lose. And so I thought, just in order to be realistic, I wanted to have a couple of things like that. Also, just from like a practical standpoint, I already have way too many characters in the novel. And if the DNA had turned up Cecily's mother's descendants, because I always imagined she probably went off and had another family, and that there probably were some siblings, nieces, nephews, and so forth out there. But I just thought, I can't do that at the end, that we have to just kind of tie up what we've got. So that was why I left her unresolved, because just for practical reasons. But also I just think, again, in life, sometimes we get healing and resolution and we get our questions answered, and other times we simply don't. So I just wanted a piece of that in the novel as well.
Anybody have any other questions? Well, thank you. I thought this was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your stories and insights with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for being here.
And yeah, thank everybody who joined. Yep,
Thank
I agree.
you.
This was a joy
Thank
too.
you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wonderful book. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope I can visit you again with my next one.
Oh, please do. We love it.
Sounds great.
When did you say the pub date is? Do you have any?
It's going to be, I think, May or June of next year. I can let you know.
Okay. I'll
Yeah.
look for it.
Okay. Sounds
Great.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Goodbye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Bye.
everybody. Thank you. Thanks.